Some of you might say that I have something against Excel. In some cases I specify I have something against the misuse of Excel, or more broadly, the misuse of a tool. In this case, since we mention Excel, also Google Sheets. In this video you will see when you hit a limit of spreadsheets and you need to move as soon as possible to a proper database. Let's try to upload a CSV, separated value file, with a heavy size on Google Spreadsheet, and let's see what happens. You see, I'll take this one, more than half gigabyte of file, open. You notice that it hangs. You could say I took an extreme example compared to the usual 30 megabytes of Excel files that I usually mention. Since I'm not using a very recent computer with just 16 gigabytes of RAM, you could also blame the computer for what happens. But if we change the tool to work with this data, you'll see a great difference. This is dbeaver. You notice from DB that as purpose it has working with databases. After we create a localhost, in this case, we go to schemas public or test, in my case it's test, we go inside tables and we select import data. CSV, I select the previous file I used. Watch out to these properties here because they can often give problems. We select next. You see that it created a table. Next. Proceed. You see here we have a problem coming from the properties of before. Say skip all. Here we can notice we can follow the number of rows it processes. Notice that we are already past 500,000. We are almost near to 2 millions. After some minutes and some hanging as well, I admit it, at least on this computer, we have our database that consists in 2 million rows. Now let's see the funny part, because we want to see the performance of having a proper database. If we go to SQL and we click here and we select New SQL Script, we can interrogate our database, or in this specific case, our table. With this script I pasted, if we go to Show Execution Log, we see the speed of interrogating data with a proper database solution instead of Excel. After we click Execute Query or Control Enter, you see that we filtered our table for this stock name in a fraction of a second. I challenge you to do that on Google Spreadsheet or Excel. Of course, in the case of Excel Online and Google Spreadsheet, we can't really compare this, because in those cases you execute, let's say, something like this in their machine, not yours. Also, with a program like that, we can also do something that becomes very wise when building reports. If you remember something of Tableau, Power BI and so on, in some videos I build the queries with drag and drop on the whole dataset. And when you start to have a number of rows like that, it becomes not convenient. In such situations, creating a view allows to handle less data and have faster reports that also require less maintenance. If we execute this, This is the time it took. It is not a millisecond, but more. Now, if we go inside views, we refresh, and we open this, we just see the subset of data that I selected here. And as I mentioned, it has much more sense to put this inside of a report instead of the queried entire database, like this one. You notice that, first of all, we have less columns, but also we have less rows. You could say that creating pivot tables is faster on a spreadsheet than on this software I'm showing. This is not entirely true because, yes, here you saw mostly the coding pivot table, but we have also a graphical user interface. And we can do that with the grouping functions in the panels. Here we have the grouping. You can even do the drag and drop. For example, stock name, you see the count. The general problem from moving from a spreadsheet to a proper database is that in spreadsheets you have the review of the edits, the so-called versioning. And for a database, especially if you don't rely on the cloud, you have to do it yourself. For example, on this software you can't do it, and on pgadmin you can do it with the so-called publication and subscription. And notice that, strictly speaking, doesn't belong to versioning. Also, this feature allows you to have different versions of the files stored, and instead, if you go through here, you have to do a backup, of course scheduled, not manually, like I'm showing you. The export data is one way, and on tools you see directly backup. Of course, doing this on this graphical interface has some limits, and if you do it with plain code, it is much more straightforward and flexible. So as you understand, every tools has its advantages and disadvantages. But in any way, you can edit this like a normal spreadsheet, and you can put values inside without particular problems. In Excel, when you have such massive data, even the edits become a reason to have anxiety. Here it is instant. That's all for this video. If you want to know more how to migrate your bloated spreadsheet databases on proper databases, we can hear each other on a free call you can book in the link in the description. Bye, and see you the next time.